And present to process means staying in your present moment experience. And so when I look at sort of a mindful performer, it's not about a single event or a future outcome. It's about holding a present moment experience in your most authentic self, in flow, by choice, and navigating all of the ups and downs with grace and grit.
What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Patrick Cook. Welcome to Being. Being is a place where we gather to explore some of life's most difficult questions. What does it mean to lead a meaningful life? What does it mean to live a life of purpose or on purpose? How do we make sense of the world? Really, what we're asking is, what the hell is going on? My intention with this podcast is to explore what it means to be human in the modern world through the lens of creativity, consciousness, and personal development. Through authentic conversations with a wide array of guests, including artists, intellectuals, scientists, visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders, Being ventures to make collective sense of an increasingly complex world with the unifying goal of building a sustainable future for all. As humanity continues to march full steam towards extinction, we can no longer afford to simply ask, what is best for me? The question now must become, what is best for me and the whole simultaneously? And so, dear audience, I want to inspire you to take full responsibility, to find your purpose, and to engage your evolution as a conscious agent. I challenge you to live your being. If you're enjoying the content, please do subscribe to the show and get a new episode delivered directly to your device every Friday. And as always, I love hearing from you. So please do rate and review the episode on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or whichever platform you prefer. And hey, I might even read your review on a future episode. Here's another 5-star review from Jackson Myers. Fantastic! Patrick Cook's energy and genuine curiosity make the conversations with his guests interesting, informative, and fun. Can't wait to see who the next guests will be. For show notes and more information, head on over to being-podcast.com. Now, on with the show. Today's guest is Derek Covington. Derek is a trained mindful performance enhancement instructor and has created systems for elite performers and teams across the globe. His career spans 9 Olympic Games as the Director of Olympic Performance for the Canadian Olympic Committee. As a former competitive national-level athlete and coach, he learned firsthand about the importance of mindfulness in achieving success as being more than just a series of techniques, but a personal journey. He now works with individuals, groups, and teams to help them live and perform mindfully through his company, First Water Performance. Derek Covington, welcome to Being. How are you, kind sir?
I am very well, Patrick. Great to be with you today, to connect with you. And I'm really jealous of you being down in Costa Rica. I wish I was there. And part of me I think all of us, there's a part of all of us that would like to be in Costa Rica with you, I think.
That's true. Yeah, it's a beautiful place for the connection to nature primarily. Like the weather is just, and how much it affects your soul is remarkable. Part of the gratitude I hold for this medium, just this podcast, is I get to talk to and connect with such incredible individuals. And, just going through your bio and your history, you are no exception. And I'm really excited to just dive in with you and hear about your journey, hear about your work, hear about your passions. One of the things that struck me in your bio is you're trained as a mindful performance enhancement instructor through the Center for Mindfulness at the University of California, San Diego, which I didn't even know was a thing. Like, I'm just astounded that that's a thing to begin with, but even that they have a program. So I'd love to hear about what that was like and what your experience was at the Center for Mindfulness.
Yeah. So, thanks, Patrick. That's fantastic. Yeah. When you look in our journey going back in time in terms of where we've been and where we're going, and sort of we have these sort of episodes in our life that are sort of major sort of ways that sort of almost have a way to kind of transfer and transform our journey. And I would
Mm.
say 2 years ago, when I was down in San Diego at the UCSD, I was there for work because we were trying to incorporate mindfulness and performance oriented mindfulness into how we prepared our Olympic team. And so,
Mm.
just take a quick step back. When you go to the Olympics, there's so many distractions, and we'd have all these elaborate external distraction management. So this was kind of a way to kind of do an internal distraction management program in
Mm.
terms of how we prepared our Olympic team. And when we look at the program that's down at the UC San Diego at the Center of Mindfulness, it's headed up by the director, Pete Kirchmer, and he's one of my dear friends and mentors. And he has done a job in terms of developing a program that is basically based on the MBSR curriculum. But instead of the focus or the intention around stress reductions around performance enhancement. And so
Mm.
it's all of the same empirically sound practices and just applied in a different context to our
Mm.
performance moments when we want to show up as our best selves, whatever those might be.
Amazing. I love that. Maybe it'd be useful to sort of, describe your journey on how you got to this place. Growing up in Montreal, I understand that you were an athlete yourself. Is that correct?
I was, yeah. And as you know, in 1976, the entire world came to Montreal for the Olympic
Mm.
Games, and I was 7 years old, and I went to the Olympic Stadium, and I went and watched track and field, and I was just electrified by the energy and what was going on. And I knew even then, as a 7-year-old, that I wanted to be part of this Olympic movement. I had no idea back then exactly what that would mean, and what even how that would even transform itself. And so for me, I got good at track and field. I got good as a 110-meter hurdler, as a 60-meter hurdler, and that was my journey. And my journey was as a competitive hurdler. Had a couple of national titles, and I was getting ready for the '92 Olympic Games in Barcelona, Spain. And I fully committed in that last year of preparation. I took time off my university. I moved down to Florida to train full time. I fully committed. I had a T-shirt that said "No pain, no gain, no Spain." And I found myself at the Olympic trials, actually as a full circle, because found myself at the Olympic trials in Montreal on one of the very training tracks that was used for the Olympic Games up at Claude Robillard Center. And I found myself in the final for the Olympic trials, lined up next to the eventual Olympic gold medalist Mark McCoy. And
Wow.
the race, the gun went off, and I had a good race until the very last hurdle, and I hit the last hurdle so hard, and I hit it so hard that the hurdle kind of came down the back of my leg, and it clipped off my shoe, and I stumbled across the finish line with one shoe. And so, what was my moment of sort of glory in terms of the top of my Olympic sort of aspirations and dream ended up being a devastating, almost sort of almost humiliating, because I then had to go walk back and pick up my shoe in front of this packed stands, and it was really a tough moment for me in my athletic career.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and so you kind of like one of those moments. It's you brush yourself off, and then I kind of went on to do other things. I went and did a master's degree in a whole different field, and I was working in that other field. But all along, I had this. I was still had this dream of getting at the Olympic Games, and it wasn't as an athlete. I shifted gears, but I then found myself at a crossroads, and an opportunity came up with Athletics Canada, which is the Track and Field Association, and I took a job there, and then a year and a half later, I found myself at my first Olympic Games in Sydney in 2000. And so it was an interesting 8-year journey from that moment in '92 on that track in Montreal to then showing up in Sydney 8 years later. And I had taken all kinds of twists and turns, but it was always kind of guiding me back to that moment.
Mm.
And then I've had a full career now. I guess it's up until the 2018 games in Pyeongchang. It's 9 Olympic Games in various roles,
Wow.
in performance as a performance director. Yeah.
Right. So in what capacity? Working specifically with the Canadian teams?
Yeah, so later in my career, I was a director of Olympic performance for the Canadian Olympic team, and
Wow.
basically, it's I work with all sports, summer and winter, and we would basically the Olympic Games are an environment where there are a lot of unique variables. And
Mm,
so you can be an otherwise perfectly prepared athlete, but then show up at the Olympic Games, and then some aspect about the games environment sort of might derail you. Could be
mm,
related to the 40 family members that show up for the very first time that have never shown up at one of your competitions ever before. It could be the opening ceremonies. It could be the politics. It could be media. It could be social media. It could be extra security. It could be village life. It could be the fact that there's a cafeteria open 24/7. It could be team dynamics,
mm.
and just sort of, and even the Olympic Games itself. It's not like a professional sport where you've always got another season. It's like the Olympic Games only shows up every 4 years, and so there's an
Mm,
added element of importance that's sort of put on the Olympic environment. And so, for me, it was all about just sort of understanding what was unique about that game's environment, so that we can make it as a kind of a competitive advantage as opposed to a competitive disadvantage, which it was. Canada had a reputation early 2000, 2004 of sort of underperforming at the Olympic Games, and so we turned
mm.
that around in terms of sort of performing to our potential, essentially, and in some cases overperforming. So it's a really interesting journey, and that's really kind of how I made my way to the UC San Diego as it relates to sort of trying to understand about how we can sort of manage those internal expectations. When you arrive at the Olympics, it's you might have a certain idea of what the environment's going to be like, but it's probably, even if you've done all of the site visits ahead of time and all of the explaining and managing expectations, is that it usually is guaranteed to be completely different than what you really expect it to be. And so
Mm,
it's when you, from a mindfulness perspective, it's sort of arriving and then allowing what is. And because the moment that you're at the Olympic Games, you're only there for a short period of time. It's a 2 week event. Sometimes your sport is only one day, for example. And so if
mm,
you're not allowing what is, and you're trying to fix it right there in the spot, then you're not focused on the right things in that moment.
mm.
So that's part of the journey that I've taken in terms of what my experience at the Olympic, and how I've kind of brought it to sort of from a mindfulness perspective. And
Yeah, fantastic. I love that. And so that brought you to founding First Water Performance. Is that correct? This is your company that works with. Is it all athletes, or do you work with business people as well?
I work with anybody that sort of identifies as a performer. So that could be in whatever their field of play. It could be a corporate athlete. It could be an athlete. It could be a coach in sports, or it could be anybody getting up
Mm,
on stage. It could be first responders. It could be so. First water. Yeah, it's in terms of a transition from what I was doing at the Olympic level, and now working in the area of performance mindfulness, and applying all that. So, I mean, first of all, the name is First Water. First water refers to an old way of measuring the quality of diamonds, and so a diamond was its water, and so the diamond that was the first water, if it had its highest clarity and brilliance, and so it just allowed for a rich kind of conversation, or a rich metaphor for clarity. So inner clarity,
mm,
focus, concentration, even clarity in relation to perspective on how we're reacting, or perspective on some of the goals that we've set, and non-attachment. And then, of course, the strength of a diamond and the strength of water are incredibly strong, but they're very different in how they're strong, And then, of
mm,
course, water, be like water, and how we're abiding to our environment, and how we're sort of flowing through life. So it just sort of allows me to kind of the first water was just sort of kind of comes back to flow, strength, and clarity for me. Yeah, in
mm.
terms of how I work
Yeah,
with clients or with teams and things like that. Yeah.
beautiful. And those are sort of the core tenets of the clarity, or the First Water principles: clarity, strength, and flow, which it says on your website, which is beautiful. And I had a couple of questions, if you wouldn't mind helping me unpack them. Like, how do you encourage clarity which you describe as accessing your inner calm space, so a mindfulness, I suppose. How do you help your clients access that, specifically at scale? So if you're dealing with a team, or a business, a corporation, or something like that, how do you help them access mindfulness at scale, like not only at the individual level?
Yeah, and so one of the tools, or one of the ways that I work with clients is through the MPEAK program. Actually, is using a mountain visualization, and so we work with individuals in terms of sort of through a visualization process, in terms of imagining sort of standing in front of a mountain that's cloud covered, and you then look down and sort of see a trailhead, and it's sort of what's motivating you to take that step. And then as you're going up the mountain, you're encountering difficulty, and you're encountering setbacks, and then you're also encountering beautiful vistas, and then of course the clouds part, or the air clears, and then of course revealing a higher mountain. And so in terms of how we visualize that, and we then work with that in terms of sort of what are your goals or outcomes, and and then the higher peak is sort of how we're setting our intentions. What is our higher purpose in relation? Are we there to win a gold medal? Are we there to do something that's connected to a kind of a larger common purpose? And so we work with that, and then. And then how I work with clients in terms of them sort of going through that process, and then it's a question of like, okay, let's put it aside, okay, and then let's stop evaluating or checking up on how we're progressing towards that, and then how we're kind of holding those sort of outcomes or future objectives as intentions that are in the present moment, or in our inner experience, and then we kind of bring the mountain inward as it relates to how we work with clients. And so that inner mountain is part of that clarity piece. And so when we're going through difficulty, when we have setbacks, when we're going through uncertainty and failure, quite frankly, that inner clarity kind of gives us that ability to kind of sort of see perspective and be able to move forward and be grounded in our purpose. So it's basically a process of taking our purpose and then sort of embodying it in a sort of a tangible and very accessible way for people to be able to move forward in all they're doing. And so a lot of the work I do is around reimagine impossible, but impossible really is just another word for the unknown. And so when we're looking at the storm, it could be the storm related to things that are out of our control, like a global pandemic or politics, or it could be, anything really as it relates to when we are embarking on taking a big challenge, or taking on a big goal. Invariably, the challenge is, and if it's a stretch goal, our challenge would be greater than our skill set to be able to achieve it. And so there's always that, when you're moving through that process, there's like, okay, two things can happen. My skills get higher, and then I get bored of the challenge, and I look for more challenge, or the challenge is greater than my current skill set, and then I go and look for new skills to meet the challenge. And then that's sort of part of this whole growth mindset, as you're going from where you are to where you want to go. And so through that process, of course, you're encountering unpredictability and risk, and complexity, and so as you're moving through that, you're going to encounter failure. And so, and it's in that mindfulness practice, that clarity practice, it just allows you to have those real time, instant feedback mechanisms, so as you're sort of course correcting through your journey, kind of thing. And so that's a big part of the clarity piece. As it relates to sort of simple clarity. In our practice, of course, when we're sitting doing an awareness of breath meditation, and we find ourselves mind wandering, and so that moment of clarity is the moment that you realize that you're mind wandering, and it's not a failure that my mind wander, I'm no longer focused on my breath, but it's that moment of catching yourself is the moment of mindfulness. And it's those moment of mindfulnesses that kind of help you come back to a choice that's consistent with your intentions, that's sort of leading you towards how you're kind of moving forward and towards your mountain, if you will, as a metaphor. So we work a lot with that in terms of building that clarity and being able to sort of strengthen that focus muscle, that concentration muscle. It's that sort of moment where you kind of you recognize or you catch yourself or notice things in your environment that you're maybe caught up in story or things like that are sort of taking you away from how you're grounded in the present moment.
Hey, are you feeling lost, frustrated, angry about the state of the world, but unsure what to do about it? I get it. The world is a pretty messed up place right now. Yet, in these interesting times of shattered realities, many people are using alcohol to escape and numb their feelings of anxiety, dread, and uncertainty. I know, I did it for years. This is why I've made it my mission to support brave souls in mastering their inner world and finding a deeper sense of purpose. To that end, I created Reset 2020. Reset is a personal transformation mastermind group with the intention of resetting your relationship with alcohol and becoming the best version of yourself in an empowering, supportive online community. To check out more about Reset 2020 and to watch my masterclass video, head on over to go.patrickcooklife.com. Remember, Cook is spelled with an E, C-O-O-K-E. So it's go.patrickcooklife.com. All right, now back to the show. Fantastic. I love all of this. This is so relevant. And one of the reasons I love this podcast is that I get to speak to people like you. And we work in similar modalities, but just with a different perspective, sometimes different language. So to hear you explain mindfulness in sort of different language or vocabulary is really exciting for me because it is such a necessary and beautiful skill for everybody to learn. But I want to come back to what you were just talking about. For me, there's a sort of a balance between presence or mindfulness and purpose, because presence is kind of like an in the moment, mindful, you are just being. Right, rather than purpose, which is typically attached to a doing or looking forward or moving towards the future, a goal. And so balancing those two together, I think, is really what this comes down to: being super present in the moment to what is going and allowing it to be, but also be clear on which direction you're moving and what the purpose is behind it. And so with regards to the purpose, though, it's not always clear for me that the purpose is ethically motivated. So this is one of the things I wanted to ask you. On your website, it says, through mindful choices, we help individuals, teams, and businesses optimize their potential in the achievement of purposeful outcomes and in the adoption of sustainable ways of being. So there inherently in that statement, there's that sort of balance in the ethics. But purposeful outcomes, like, what does that mean to you? And as far as like when you're helping an organization or a corporation or a team determine what their purpose is, for example, corporations, typically their purpose is to maximize shareholder profit. So that doesn't necessarily align with being a sustainable outcome or a sustainable way of being. So how do you harmonize those two, like a vision of creating a sustainable way of being with purpose?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's a lot of examples of corporations that have demonstrated that you can have this sort of dual bottom line. And so you can be looking at the corporate profits at the same time as understanding that your workforce is part of the equation that kind of gets you the profits. And so working with your workforce in a way that recognizes them, values them. It's not about fixing them. It's about finding about what everything is right and valued in the work that they're doing in terms of how they're working towards some of those outcomes. And so when I look at that, sort of the way I look at it is sort of allowing. So that's in the being in the present moment. And so this is not about suppressing emotions. It's not about running away from them either. It's really about sort of having that curiosity. It's about having moving towards. It's about sort of noticing. It's about being that investigator. So you're investigating those emotions.
Mm.
And then then of course through that process, when you're able to sort of then add in sort of how you're cultivating self-compassion, how you're cultivating practicing positivity, how you're cultivating gratitude. Those are
Mm.
some of the key components in terms of when we are listening to our sort of inner critic, because a lot of our performers are individuals that have a high association with perfectionism, and so we have this idea
Mm.
that I am my last result, I am my result, and so of course when you're a perfectionist, you have these high expectations of standards that are unrealistic, and of course, you can
Mm-hmm.
never kind of get there, which then fuels this sort of self critic as well as um, so the self critic is then questioning your ability, and you're building stories, and then you're
Mm.
simulating outcomes as it relates to how you're going to get through this. And so it's sort of like, I look at an old stereo system where you had stereo A and stereo B, and you've got this inner critic that might be on 8 all the time, and you're listening to that inner critic all day long. That inner critic might be also saying things like, I'm not going to make it, or I'm not good enough, or who am I to say that I can do this kind of thing. And so it's like that. And that volume B is sort of some of those other things. It's like heart-centered self-compassion, practicing positivity, gratitude. And so it's not about sort of drowning it out, but there's the allowing of the critic, but then it's also just sort of balancing it out with a different perspective on things. And so
Mm.
we're prone to sort of to look at negativity. So it's like, how are we sort of allowing? And so we're looking at a situation. It's like, okay, what else can be true in this situation, that allows us to kind of look a little bit differently at a situation, and then sort of cultivate some of these other practices that then could also tie into things that are aligned with our values and our purpose. So
Mm.
that's sort of how I would look at it in terms of how we're kind of cultivating some of these other values, and also ways of being, because they're
Yeah.
often suppressed or maybe dismissed, kind of thing. So that's kind of how.
Yeah. Yes. And I so resonate with that as an artist myself and a performer. I perform music live. I totally resonate with that. And the inner critic jumping up all the time, and you get caught in those stories. It's the ego identification, really, from an Eastern perspective. It's you're caught in that ego mind, which is the survival instinct at its core. It's the ego is designed to keep us safe, and it's very good at it because it can convince us of anything. But I think, really trusting that heart centered, intuitive space where your deep creativity and your performance comes from. Like when you're in the flow of a performance, you're not in your head, you're not in your ego. You're in that deep core knowingness, being state of complete presence, flow state, which is another thing I want to talk to you about because that's something I'm really passionate about. But just while we're on the topic of, I'm really curious how, working with individuals differs from working with groups or teams or corporations, even more specifically. Because to me, conventional success at a high level, be it in sports or business, requires us to forgo sort of a kind of empathy, or, it's like the win at all costs mindset, right? And so we're disregarding the well-being of the opponent, be it, or, the competition in business or the opponent in sports. And in fact, at the top of the power structures across the world, we see an asymmetrical number of psychopaths, which is really just defined as, the ability to forego empathy or remorse and be egotistical in your desires. And so, do you think that the mindset needed to excel and win at the Olympic Games, for example, is commensurate with the greater good of humanity? Like, does that make sense? Is that clear? Because I'm really curious if those are in alignment. Because if you're looking to win at all costs for yourself, be it in business or the Olympic Games, is that a good model for how to be a good human being? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, it's funny that this same conversation came up in one of my groups that I work with through the MPEAK program, and it was like, okay, well, uh, the sort of asshole athlete and the really nice athlete. You know, if you want to take two two types of athletes, and they both win Olympic gold medal. So there are two ways to get to that Olympic gold medal. You can do it so they both will generate results. In one case, there might be collateral damage in terms of the winning at all costs might have costs as it relates to burnout and identification with result or identification as yourself as an athlete. Whereas if you're doing it, holding your objectives and your way forward more mindfully in the present moment, you'll still get the results, but there may be less ability to have side effects on that aspect of things. And so when I look at the work that I do with teams, there are, in terms of generating that self-awareness around working with teams, we work with obviously an awareness tools around how the team is communicating, how the team is sort of evaluating itself on team trust. And also, I guess most importantly is do they have a collective vision for what they're looking out to do? Because when you get to the Olympic Games, it's so easy for individuals to show up and want to be the massage therapist plus, for example, or be the person in a role. All of a sudden they want to, everyone wants to kind of, they all of a sudden they need to be recentered as it relates to what their collective benefit is, as how they're working together as a team. And so, I've seen this, in Vancouver when we were at our home games, tapping into something that was bigger than yourself, being at the Olympic Games and being at your at home Olympic Games, was a really powerful thing. And I think Canada itself does a really fantastic job at sort of tapping into the team spirit and being able to kind of look beyond their specific outcome that they're trying to achieve on the podium and tap into sort of getting support from a larger network. And so, and a larger team. And of course, and then finding meaning through community, finding meaning through being part of a team, finding meaning through giving back, finding meaning through giving back to the future next generations of up and coming athletes and things like that. And so, a lot of these things are really important as it relates to how you might kind of navigate some of these sort of performance outcomes that you're looking to do. But of course, at the end of the day, it's when it's really hard to do is that when you have that performance outcome, it's sort of how can you have that performance outcome and then just be present to process. So any good coach will tell you that you need to be present to process, and present to process means staying in your present moment experience. And so when I look at sort of a mindful performer, it's not about a single event or a future outcome. It's about holding a present moment experience in your most authentic self, in flow, by choice, and navigating all of the ups and downs with grace and grit. And so it's really how you're navigating all of that is really important in terms of how you're going to navigate through disruption, through uncertainty, through chaos, through the storm. And what's really interesting is that when it comes to purpose, because when you're going through difficulty, you can have these moments where you can lose sight of things, and your purpose or your why is what kind of keeps you going. But stated more powerfully, the storm holds the promise for the very transformation that we're seeking by having taken on the big challenge in the first place.
Totally.
Okay? And so you're leaping into the unknown. You don't know if you're gonna achieve the outcome. Okay. And it's leaping into that unknown, and it's through that process of navigating and through all of that unknown, that's when you have the transformation. And so and transformation, and also sort of reconnection with your sense of purpose. Because when you go into the storm, how you enter the storm and how you exit the storm, that's what the storm is all about.
Yeah, and that's a great model for life.
The storm is all about the transformation.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what's coming up for me right now is, I'm just imagining myself as an Olympic athlete and connecting into something that's higher than myself and my sense of purpose. And I can't help but thinking that how my sense of purpose or my worthiness would be tied to my identity. So if I'm a high performing athlete and, my sense of purpose would be help the team and be the best version of myself, excel at the greatest level I'm capable of on all levels, then after the Olympic Games or after my career is over, how does that identity sort of dissolve, and how does that affect me on a personal level? Like, are we connecting these athletes to a sense of purpose that transcends their performance at one specific Olympic Games? Because how many, and I'm sure you can answer this question, how many athletes fall into some state of depression or unworthiness after their career is over? Like, that seems like a grave danger. So how do we connect to something bigger than ourselves that transcends their performance at one specific feat?
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you brought that up, because it's such a big important topic as it relates to the
Mm,
mental health of our athletes, and identification with themselves as Olympian, identification with themselves as an athlete from from a
mm,
specific sport, and then of course identification with themselves as their result. And so maybe they had a great result at the Olympic Games, maybe they had a poor result, and so there's that identification with that. And then of course, typically, even similar to my own personal example, not as an Olympian, but certainly as it relates to putting everything on the line, putting everything, your whole life on hold, and just focusing on this one thing, and then having to then navigate the transition into another part of your life. And of course,
mhm,
it's and it does lead to some mental health problems for athletes. And so this
mm,
is where, in terms of how how I would work with athletes, it's sort of like, okay, well, this is part of your commitment to your sport, and it's being able to tap into some of these larger purposes as to, okay, am I just going there to win an Olympic medal, or is there something that I can tap into that's bigger than that? And then that does two things.
and what typically is that?
Well, it is.
What is the typical purpose that is bigger than yourself?
Um, it's some of the things I mentioned earlier. So you might want to give back to your community, whatever your
Right.
community might be for you. So it could be your family, your friends. It could be some other community that you associate with. It could be about giving back to the next generation, or to a future
Mm,
generation. It could be being part of something larger themselves, as part of being part of Team Canada, or
mm,
doing it for your country. So these are all things that typically people athletes can associate with, that helps sort of actually diminish the pressure on their shoulders, and it also kind of brings in the common humanity and of what they're doing, that they're not there alone. And that, so often what we find is that an athlete, even though the two athletes may not know each other, they might be from two parts of the country, they might be in two completely different sports, but then when they start talking, they're like, oh, well, this is unique to me, and this is unique to the other person. But then they start talking, and they realize that it's actually very common in terms of some of the struggles that they're dealing with. And so it's those moments when you're part of a collective movement, a collective movement. And of course, it's a global movement as part of the Olympics, and it's very strong within national federations and within sports, but individual sports. But all of that helps you sort of, you know, leave the games with a sense of pride, and be able to take,
mm,
regardless of your result, and be able to take that pride into the next sort of transition of your career. And so all of these
mm,
transitions are all different versions of that storm I keep coming back to. It's like, and so it's how you're navigating through all that. And so the transition itself becomes part of how you transform into the next stage of your career. And I'm not saying it's easy. It's not, and it takes a lot of work. And I think mindfulness actually is a great tool to be able to kind of create that awareness of the moment, and allowing all of that flood of emotions, allowing all of those things, and then practicing our how we're more than our reactions, we're more than our thoughts, we're more than those things, and sort of being able to kind of be curious about them, and then being able to kind of soften around them, and then being able to kind of then move forward in ways that align with sort of a new set of intentionality, kind of thing. But yeah, so it's an important process, and again, it's quite pronounced through that Olympic cycle, but it's also a part of even everyday life, or even navigating a pandemic, or some other large sort of life change, and so all of this is quite relevant to all of us, and I think we can all feel it right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that's a good way to just sort of zoom out for a second. So one of the reasons I started this podcast was just like, let's question everything. Let's just be completely clear, and let's have honest, vulnerable conversations about it for the intention of finding higher truth or deepening understanding. And so through my journey, I've just been like, okay, nothing's off the table. Let's just question everything. And so sports and the arts and music, all these things are things that have come to my attention. It's like, okay, why are we practicing these sports, or pursuing the arts, or pursuing high performance in the first place? There's obvious benefits, yes, but there's also obvious detriments, And so from a sort of a macro level, on a species level, what are the benefits of pursuing high performance sports, and what are the detriments of it? Because, obviously, one that comes up for me is that we are nurturing this win at all costs mindset, right? Which inherently causes division and conflict and competition, which for me is at the root of a lot of the problems we're seeing in the world right now. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but under the system that we live in, capitalism, we're incentivized to compete. We're incentivized to outcompete other people, at benefit for ourselves. And so one of the questions, or one of the mantras I've been using is like, okay, how can we define success in a way that it is best for me, but it's also best for the whole at the same time? And I think sports specifically, and even within the competition, say in the music business, or some of the entertainment business, you are incentivized to be better than the next person, to win at all costs, and have no empathy or remorse if they lose. And I think that model is not sustainable for us as a human, as a species. So I think, what I'm asking is, like, from a more macro level, what are the base benefits of pursuing a high performance career, and what are some of the detriments or the pitfalls that we could fall into?
Yeah, this is an amazing topic and conversation as it relates to around that topic. And so when we look at the high performer, and so the high performer associates with hypervigilance. I have to be everything. They associate with being a perfectionist. I have to be good at everything, and they also associate with outcome. And so I am my result. And so. And this is essentially at the heart of the work that I'm doing, is like, so how can you, the mindful performer is not the performer who's winning at all costs. Does that mean that you're taking your foot off the gas pedal? Does that mean you're lowering your standards? Does that mean you're demonstrating less standards,
or losing competitive edge?
Yeah, or losing competitive edge. Exactly. And so I think this kind of goes back to my earlier. It's like you can still get the result with less collateral damage. You can burn clean fuel as opposed to fossil fuels, for example. Both will get you there. One will get you there in a way that allows you to kind of live in the present moment. And so this is where you're sort of, this is the essentially it's about the journey and not the outcome. And so This allows you to then live the journey regardless of what the outcome is. You still live the journey in a way where your standards of excellence, your commitment, and even some of the sort of grit and determination and courage and commitment. So some of the more the yang side of our being, and then balancing it off with with some of the heart centered aspects of things, around self compassion especially. And so doing that in a way, and this is essentially the a lot of the work that I do is really revolves around this idea of this athlete that is able to kind of operate in this sort of still, quiet place, or this moment of clarity, where there's all these things going on around him or her as it relates to how they're navigating all that, and then doing it in a way where they're able to hold these outcomes that they've established, but do it in a way that's part of this sort of inner land. They're embodying the experience in the present moment, and so. I think there are a lot of sports teams. Golden State Warriors and the Bulls are famous for having brought in mindfulness practices, for people to let go of self, let go of expectations, let go of outcome, and then be able to just do what you do best, to sort of to kind of to be and to realize your full expression of yourself in the present moment. And so and these are all the moments where, we get into topics of flow, but these are the moments that are that where the performer is at their authentic best, and it's also these moments where there's space between the sort of the stimulus and response, and creating that space and the time slowing down. You have these moments of clarity, and there's moments of peace as well. And so this is kind of where you kind of get into flow states, and it's flow states are not the quiet, peaceful Sunday morning flow states. I mean, those are pleasant as well. Those are very pleasant, but it's when you're in the middle of the storm and the complexity and the unpredictability and the risk. That's when you actually experience those flow states that have been documented through the work of Mihaly. So as it relates to, in some ways, it's when I look at sport, and I look at even Phil Knight's Shoe Dog, his book that I'm going through right now, and it's like when he wanted to work in an environment where that 10 seconds to the buzzer moment, and living that moment where everything is on the line and you're playing and you're having fun. Yes, there's might be an outcome on the line, but there's that moment of where you're expressing your full self and you're letting go of yourself. And so I call it unselfing yourself. And so how you're doing that in a way. This is where sport, all the good sides of sport can kind of create those types of experiences for athletes and for coaches. And I think there's a shadow side to everything. There's a shadow side to our strengths. There's a shadow side to sport. There's a shadow side to politics and corporate. There's even a shadow to flow, and so you have these flow junkies that kind of are out there looking for flow and creating these external conditions for themselves, and so I think I think that's part of the awareness piece. I think that's part of the choice piece. And so when I talk about mindfulness when it matters most, it's at the end of the day, it's your choice. It's you decide what matters most. And is it when you're getting up on stage to do a big presentation or lining up on an Olympic final, or is it when you're having a conversation with a teammate or a spouse or something like that? And so these are the moments that you get to choose, and it's all part of that awareness piece. And so it's that allowing piece, it's that clarity piece, it's that being aware of when you've been on Instagram for 45 minutes and don't realize it, and you catch yourself in that moment. That's the mindful moment where you're like, okay, yeah, I followed this notification and those 45 minutes ago, and now I gotta choose differently to be with my son or daughter who's right next to you, kind of thing. And so all of that is part of and we've kind of gone a little bit off topic here as it relates to your original topic around sport, but I think these are some of the things that sport can bring. And of course, when you look at sport, even at the Olympic level, and as an inspiration for young people, as an inspiration for a country, I think whenever your Canada does well on the world scene, whether it's in commercial endeavors or whether it's in political endeavors or whether it's in sport. I mean, there's a sense of pride around how Canada did at an event, or even or culturally, of course, as well, in terms of if we have a cultural band, we're obviously proud when we see our artists and our artists doing well on the international stage, and so I think sport is part of that, and it's not saying that it doesn't have its sort of shadows that I keep talking about, or dark side, and even the politics at the International Olympics and things like that. There's all kinds of stuff, but I think overwhelming. There's an opportunity there for sport for good, and level playing field, as it relates to doing good, even for refugee programs and for sport, where sport is sort of an entryway for play and for conversations and for growth, and transformation of individuals. And so when we talk about reimagine impossible, it's whether it's you're trying to go for an Olympic medal, but it's also an underprivileged, or less privileged kid who's looking for something, to work and believe beyond what their current potential is, and seeing the potential in themselves, that they may not be able to see for themselves. And I think and I think sport kind of has as a gateway or an opening for that level, and that can be at the recreational level, in terms of building a character or set of values. But then, of course, as you move up into the higher ranks, I think it's just sort of different levels of the same thing. So I think it's an important way to help us express ourselves. And I think sport and culture, I think, are very similar in that way, in terms of expressing yourself, through an art form or through a body. I mean, a physical expression of self. So I think it's an important thing. Yeah, for sure.
So much goodness in that answer. So much I'd love to chat further about. But I want to come back to one of the things you talked about, and I'm really passionate about collective states, like collective flow states, for example, and which are possible through sport and also through music and other modalities. But again, and I'm really passionate about moving humanity forward, evolving humanity in a way that is moving towards sustainability and cooperation. And I think one of the things that sports does, and this is also true of music, is that it encourages us to be, like you said, in our best self, to be sharing our unique gifts in a powerful way in the present moment. And I think that's really what the purpose of all of us, our modus operandi for being, is to be our best version self, whatever that means for us on a unique individual level. And then, and that also means cultivating mindfulness and healing trauma and being, cultivating self-awareness, all the things we're talking about. That's part of my responsibility. But it also means once you've done that sort of inner work, you can show up more powerfully as an individual, be more expressed, and then be more coherent in a collective state, whether it being performing with a sports team, performing with an orchestra, or performing at the corporate board of directors, whatever it might be. But I think that's really, really powerful, and it's the key to solving a lot of the world's problems, I think, is once we can figure out how we can work together on a larger scale in a collective flow state where we're all working towards the same purpose, the same goal, in a sustainable way. And I think that's beautiful the way you described it. I want to be cognizant of your time. Derek, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your wisdom. I've got a couple more questions. This is one of my favorites, and we sort of talked about it. We've talked about success and what that means for a lot of different people, but I'm really interested in what is your definition of success, and has it changed over time?
Okay, that's a great question, and when I think of success, I think when I look at my own career, my definition of success would have been heavily tied to my idea of what job I had or what title I had or what I was doing. In in my career at the Olympic Committee, I was actually not part of. I did not have any kind of vertical growth. I was a director for almost close to 14 years. And so for me, when I looked at success in that type of sort of flat environment and from a strict title perspective, where I was sort of tapping into my sense of purpose, and I defined my sense of purpose when I was at the Olympic Committee very simply as sort of helping people realize their best selves through Olympic sport. Okay, so
awesome.
As long as I was doing that, then as long as I was continuing to sort of push the envelope and how we were doing that, working with athletes and coaches and teams, to me that was success. And so being able to do that, especially at scale for a team of 400 athletes at the Olympic Games, is not an easy thing to do. And each individual team has its own culture and their own scale, their own sense, also their own resources. So some are high resource and some are low resource teams. And so being able to do that required us to kind of continually expand how we were working with our teams, and so for me that was a sense of success. Now I'm looking at success. I'm starting a business in the middle of a pandemic, which has its own sense of its own element of risk and unpredictability and unknown, and I'm throwing myself in the middle of this, and I'm saying, okay, well, I don't know what my business is going to look like in 3 months or 6 months or 9 or 12 months. Especially this type of work that I do is actually better done face to face. And so here I am kind of having to do it virtually. And so the very unknown of that leads to a sense of transformation that I'll come out with at the other end. So when I look at sort of targets in terms of performance targets for me, I sort of put those to the side, and it's like, okay, my sense of community, the sense of what nurtures me in the work that I do, in terms of the people that I'm connecting with, in terms of the people that I help, in terms of them working through my courses and helping them become more of a mindful performer. These are all elements that kind of really kind of ground me in my sense of what I'm doing in this part of my career. And so, and if I have to go through some sort of, if an organization, and I think a lot of organizations, might be looking at some lean years from a financial perspective or some difficulty on that aspect of things, how you navigate all of that is sort of how you will come out of that a little bit, actually come out of it stronger. So, those are all sort of definitions of success. It's actually not the transformation itself is what defines this success. And then that even goes back to our discussion earlier around dual bottom lines. And so the success of an organization is defined by how your people are transformed through the work that you're doing as a corporation or as a team, as a business kind of thing. And so, so that's how I would put that.
It's more of what I hear you saying is it's more of a moment to moment feeling rather than a specific outcome, right? And that's in that sense, you can feel success all the time, a moment to moment feeling. And that's just absolutely beautiful. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about your shirt. We spoke about it before we started recording, but for those of you listening and not watching the video, Derek is wearing an orange shirt that says, what does it say? Surf?
Surf in the Olympics in 2016.
Awesome. Okay, let's hear about this.
Well, for most of you who follow the Olympic sport, you know that surfing is not in the Olympics until 2020, and so or 2021 Tokyo Olympic Games. I was down in a site visit prior to the 2016 Olympics, and I think I picked up this T-shirt at a surf shop in Rio, and they were just, even though the surfing was not part of the Olympics in 2016, it was there in spirit for sure, and it was as expressed also through this T-shirt. It's also Orange Shirt Day, September 30th, in recognition of Indigenous peoples around the world and in Canada, and even as it relates to some of the racial injustices that have been perpetrated against Indigenous populations in Canada, and recognition of that, and some of the so that today is Orange Shirt Day. So I'm able to talk about Olympics and also support an important cause, or support an important awareness around our own collective history.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So I have one more question before we let you go. And it is this: if you were to take all of your experiences, all the knowledge, the wisdom gained, distill them down into one short message, what would it be?
Absolutely, it's around cultivating that awareness in the present moment, and that might and there's actually real ways you can do that in terms of being able to kind of get out of sort of your subconscious and into more of a conscious, and in doing that, you then are able to make choices that you would not maybe have been otherwise aware of. And so it's that moment to moment awareness. And of course, it's not a something conceptual. It's something that it has to be, it's pre-conceptual. So you really have to embody the practice, and to really kind of understand what that means. And that just allows you to kind of live in the moment. I know that sounds a little bit sort of canned or whatever, but it really is an embodied practice in terms of how you're living, and then moment to moment in terms of how you're then moving forward in terms of how you're getting to that moment of transformation. And then when you're doing it, navigating challenge, and this is challenge that's maybe externally imposed like a pandemic, or internally imposed as it relates to taking on big objectives, that's when the real transformation really can help a lot. So that's kind of how I'd sum it up.
Woo, beautiful. Thank you so much for that. Derek Covington, I really appreciate your time today. Tell people where they can find you if they want to reach out to First Water and about your coaching.
Sure, firstwaterperformance.com, and you'll find everything there as it relates to the work that we do with coaching, one-on-one, working with teams and workplaces, and also some of the courses that we have. I have a masterclass that's starting October 20th. It's called the Mindful Performance Enhancement Awareness and Knowledge, MPEAK. It's the UCSD program, basically, that I'll be offering October 20th. Check out the website. And hope to see you there. We have some great experiences there in terms of non-traditional mindful meditation, experiential learning, and exploring pain and discomfort through ice baths and restricted breathing, as well as dexterity exercises under pressure. And we have a lot of fun with it. So it's kind of a very accessible way to get into mindfulness. And also how you might be applying them to what's important to you in your performance moments, whether they're small or big, So, check it out.
Fantastic. Derek, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll talk to you real soon, man.
Thank you, Patrick. Great talking to you today.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. And if you enjoyed the show, please do subscribe, rate, and review. For more information and show notes, head on over to being-podcast.com. We'll see you next time, and remember, live your being.